Morning, everyone. 8 days until the signing of the Global Compact on Migration. It's signed on the 10th, 11th in Marrakesh. Justin Trudeau is planning on signing. I wanted to show you that with regards to immigration, the plan is, and always was, modern times anyway, since probably the early 90s, maybe the 2000s, the plan has been replacement. And I'm going to show you from Government of Canada Statscan website the projections for population growth between now and 2063. And they state that 90% of the population growth in Canada will come from immigrants. 90% of the population growth. 90%. That's replacement, everyone. That's not very long from now. 2063 is 40 years, 45 years. So hopefully I'll still be alive. So what is this? This is the Institute for Canadian Citizenship. And if you don't know what the Institute for Canadian Citizenship is, well, it's a taxpayer-funded institute that was created by the former Governor General of Canada, Adrienne Clarkson. Here's Adrienne Clarkson. And you would think that a Governor General of Canada would be concerned about Canadian citizens and Canadian citizens who live in Canada. But well, let's just read what she says. So here's a message from our co-founders and co-chairs. Quote, our vision at the ICC keeps in mind that eventually Canada's net population growth will be entirely attributed to immigration. By creating opportunities for new Canadian citizens to participate fully in our cultural and political life, we will be able to continue to nurture the kind of society we have worked so hard to create. Public education, cultural activities, parks, and medical care. What? The whole of Canada's population growth will be attributed to immigration? All of it? What? But yeah, that's exactly what's happening. So I'm going to go through. Here's the Statscan website. And I don't know why because I've got my my highlighter here. But this is the Statscan website. You can see the link in the description, and you can follow these links yourself. And I've highlighted what is important. So well, here we go. And we're going to talk about fertility. We're going to talk about fertility rates in Canada, and we're going to compare it to the United States. I couldn't find a Canadian study, and I was just doing a quick Google search, so I will attempt to dig into it further later. But I wanted to show you what's happening to Canadian fertility. It's at 1.6%. That means 1.6 kids per woman, right? So that's not replacement population. That's, well, treading water, not even, right? We would have a declining population if there were no immigrants coming into Canada, which is why there's so much political will on the side of the politicians to continue to bring in at least 250,000 immigrants, because our population would continue to decline. Okay, so we're going to talk about fertility, Canadian fertility, and we look at a Quebec study. We're going to look at the media's push to use carbon as an excuse not to have children. But even in my generation, it was kind of a push to have fewer kids, or you don't need so many kids, et cetera, et cetera. And we're going to look at what are we importing? What's happening with the Global Compact on Migration that's being signed on December 11th by Justin Trudeau, and what the projected immigration looks like according to the plan from Statscan. Okay, here it is. Introduction. Fertility has a major impact on the size and age structure of a population. Assumptions are based on examination of historical and recent trends in fertility at provincial, territorial, national, and international levels, results from the opinion survey on future demographic trends, and evidence from the scientific literature. Trends in fertility are examined using many different indicators from the perspective of age, parity, period, and cohort. 3 assumptions, low, medium, high, are formulated. Fertility trends. Following a sharp decline between the baby boom period and the early 1980s, Canada's period total fertility rate, PTFR, has fluctuated between 1.5 and 1.7 children per woman for more than 30 years. This relative stability has been paired with a continued increase in the ages at which most Canadian women are having their children. After experiencing the lowest fertility rate ever recorded in Canada in 2000-2002, 1.51 children per woman, the period 2003 to 2008 saw the fertility rate increase steadily to reach 1.68 children per woman in 2008. Okay, so what's happening is women are getting older and having kids later, like getting older when they have children, right? So that's being seen within the data. Women are older, and I'll show you the fertility rates by age in a minute. But do you think maybe there's a correlation? Women are having babies older. Why are they having babies older? Spoiler alert, it's more expensive, right? They're not stable at 19, 20. They don't have a house. They don't have a family. They don't even have a job or any means to support those things. So, of course, they have to wait 10 more years, right? Whereas in the 1950s, if you were married at 19, you probably had a husband. The husband probably had a job and a way to have an apartment or something to that effect. And right or wrong, that's just how things were back then, right? So back to this article. Beginning in the 1970s, the age-specific fertility rates, ASFR, of women under the age of 30 began a declining trend, which resulted in two milestones in the new millennium. In 2005, for the first time, the fertility rates of women aged 30 to 34 surpassed those of women aged 29 to 25. More women aged 30 to 34 were having kids than women aged 29 to 25. So it's not just 10 years later, now it's 15 years later. And while in 2011, for the first time, the fertility rates of women aged 35 to 39 surpassed those of women aged 20 to 24. More women aged 35 to 39 were having kids than women aged 20 to 24 in 2011. Okay. Since 2007, the combined fertility rates of women aged 30 to 39 have been higher than those of age women 20 to 29. So put together, again, women are older when they have their children in the West. This results in people having fewer children. So this is section 2, results at the Canada level. And so this is the growth of the Canadian population from 2013 to 2063. So this is kind of the meat of this, and then we're going to look at some of the other stuff I talked about at the top. Okay, so the Canadian population has grown substantially in recent years, increasing from 30.7 million in 2000 to 35.2 million in 2013. During that period, Canada's annual growth rate was higher than the average for OECD countries. The results of the various scenarios published here show that growth would continue over the next 50 years. However, the pace of this growth would gradually slow from the beginning of the projected period. This slowing growth would continue for varying lengths of time depending on the scenario. So they have 3 different population projections, a low population projection, a medium one, M1 scenario, and a high. So we'll look at all 3 of them. According to the medium 1 M1 scenario, the Canadian population would grow steadily, increasing from 35.2 million in 2013 to 51 million in 2063. Now, this report was done in 2015, and again, it's the 91-520X publication, the population projection for Canada 2013 to 2063. And from what I saw, it was written in 2015. So again, you can reach that in the description if you want to check it out. And they use like known numbers and then projections after 2015. So back to this. Components of population change. The components of population growth and their interaction affect not only the size of the Canadian population, but also its composition, including its age structure. It is therefore useful to analyze the impacts of different components of population change when they are combined in various scenarios. In figure 2.3, the number of births and deaths observed. Okay, so that's I don't need to worry about that yet. Okay. In the high growth scenario, the higher the number of births is explained mainly by higher fertility rates, but also to some extent by higher levels of immigration. So where do the higher fertility rates come from? Oh, I'll show you in a minute. Indeed, as a large proportion of immigrants are of childbearing age, immigration has a positive and immediate impact on the number of births. See? In contrast, in the low growth scenario, lower levels of immigration combined with lower fertility rates would lead to a slight decrease in the number of births compared to recently observed levels. And so, just in case you're unsure of what they're speaking about here, this is what they're speaking about. Family of 8 arrives in Ottawa Tuesday and will settle in Brockville, and there's a mom and dad and 6 kids whose fertility rates are making these population the high, right? It's the immigrants' fertility rates, because Canadians' fertility rates have cratered, right? We're at 1.63 right now, according to what I've read. Natural increases in the difference between births and deaths and its change over time, depending, is determined by the intensity of fertility and mortality, as well as the age structure of the Canadian population. Levels of natural increase would decrease in the coming years according to all projection scenarios, mainly due to the rise of the number of deaths. While natural increase remains positive under the high growth scenario, it becomes close to zero around 2050 in the medium growth scenario and becomes negative from 2030 to 2031 onward under the low growth scenario. Several countries have already registered negative natural increase in recent years, including the Russian Federation, Italy, Germany, and Japan. And figure 2.4. So we can look at figure 2.4. Here it is. And it's just this, it's not all that interesting if you're not really interested in the wonkiness, but this is the population kind of crashing And this is under the high growth scenario, right? So it increases. Okay, for most of the 20th century, natural increase was the main driver of population growth in Canada. However, in the middle of the 1990s, a shift occurred when immigration increased, while fertility remained relatively unchanged. As a result, migratory increase, the balance of immigration minus emigration, has been the main source of population growth in Canada for the last 2 decades. In 2012-2013, migratory increase accounted for just over 2/3 of population growth, 67.7, while natural increases accounted for the remaining 32.3% of growth. Migratory increases would continue to be the key factor behind Canada's population growth in the coming years, according to all projection scenarios. However, its importance would vary from one scenario to the next. In 2062-2063, migration would account for 90.8% of total population growth in the medium growth scenario, all population growth in the low growth scenario, and 65.2% of total population growth in the high growth scenario. So they're saying very clearly that here's the trends that we're seeing, here's the immigration that we're seeing, and under these population projections, 90% of the total population growth in the medium scenario would be from immigrants. 100% would be from immigrants in one of the scenarios, in the low scenario, which is incredible. Incredible. There's no will to fix this problem. And it is a problem. And the problem is the fertility rates are crashing for a couple of different reasons, in my opinion. So here's the historical fertility rates. So key indicators, number of births in 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16, so on. Total fertility rate, children per women, in 2012 was 1.62, 2013 1.59, 2014 1.58, 2015 1.56, 2016 1.54. You see the trend. So the number per women is going down. The age of the maternity, the age of the mother at first birth, is listed here and it's steadily rising. And the average age of maternity for all births, so when you include all births in Canada, the age goes up, right? Which is just another incredible thing. And here's the fertility rate by age group, 2016, and this is per 1,000 women, right? So this is how many births in that age group per that amount of women. So I found all of that interesting, and I wanted to show you a couple of CBC articles. Love the CBC. This one says the best way to reduce emissions: have fewer kids. Researchers say, have fewer kids, guys. We got to make room for all these people that we want to bring in. Have fewer kids. Have fewer kids. UBC research paper tries to determine most significant ways individuals can reduce their carbon footprint. Wow, look at that. Have one fewer child. Boom. Just stop having kids. Just stop. This works. It is working. We are cratering our population. Here's another one from CBC. This one was published November 28th, 2018. Don't think you can make a difference in the climate crisis? Meet some experts who say you're wrong. Ways to help. Have a smaller family. 11 things you can do to mitigate climate change. Are you worried that the world is going to be destroyed very soon because we keep reporting that the world is going to be destroyed really soon? Have one fewer child. And if you have no children, have no children, right? Because one fewer child when you are childless is none, right? And typically when Jordan Peterson was talking with Joe Rogan and said that adolescents, kids who are supposed to be making the babies, right, also want to save the world. And if this is the message they're getting, and they are getting it, they're not having kids. Try and have a conversation with somebody on Reddit about having children, and they will tell you, adopt somebody from the Middle East or adopt somebody from Africa because they need it and we don't. It's very, very strange. So why are people in Western countries not having any babies? Why not? So I asked that question and I looked it up and I did a quick Google search, and because America's a lot bigger, the United States is a lot bigger than Canada, these studies and these articles came up first. So I'm using an American study. It's instructive. It is by no means meant to say that this is definitely 100% the reason in Canada, but in a Western culture, this is universal. It is more expensive to have children. It is kids who are 15 are having their adolescence extended by never-ending school. You're not even ready to face the world until you're 32. And at that point, you're like, oh, I don't know. This place is looking pretty scary. School was pretty nice, right? So here's the New York Times reporting. Americans are having fewer babies. They told us why. Women have more options for one, but a new poll also shows that financial insecurity is altering a generation's choices. Americans are having fewer babies. At first, researchers thought declining fertility rate was because of the recession, but it kept falling even as the economy recovered. Now it has reached a record low for the second consecutive year. Because the fertility rate subtly shapes many major issues of the day, including immigration, education, housing, the labor supply, social safety net, and support for working families, there's a lot of concern about why today's young adults aren't having as many children. So we asked them, wanting more leisure time and personal freedom, not having a partner yet, not being able to afford childcare costs, those were the top reasons young adults gave for not wanting or not being sure they wanted children, according to a new survey conducted by Morning Consult for the New York Times. And so I find it interesting that childcare is too expensive, worried about the economy, can't afford more children, like worried about financial instability. 1, 2, 3, 4 of the top 5 reasons are financial, right? And one is I want more time for the children I have, presumably because you're working a job and you need to make money to feed the children that you have. And when you are done that job, you come home and you collapse because you're ridiculously tired because, hey, I live in this society too, and I know what happens, right? So all of these people are saying we are not financially stable enough to have a family. It used to be, I remember growing up, my grandfather and grandmother, my grandmother stayed home when she was a mother, and she raised the kids, and my grandfather went out to work. And my grandfather came over to Canada, and that was hard. But even when the rest of the family got brought over by him, legally, right? I'm a first-generation Canadian, everybody. They still raised the family until my dad was old enough to be out of the house and working and so on. And then my grandmother worked at Eaton's in Toronto, right? Because that's what she did. And she did that until almost the day she died, which is incredible. But now, kids do not have the opportunity. The family has been so thoroughly destroyed that not only do young kids not want to have children, they're being told that if they have kids, it's going to destroy the world. And even if they did want to have kids, it's really, really expensive, right? And here's why it matters. Here's Fox News. Here's why it matters that Americans are having fewer children than ever before. Americans and Europeans are abandoning parenthood at an alarming rate, profoundly changing the nature of our societies, our policies, and our cultures. Last year, women in the U.S. had children at the lowest rate ever recorded. There were just 60.2 births for every 1,000 girls, and women ages 15 to 44 in our country. As a result, there were fewer births in America last year, 3.85 million babies, than at any time since 1987. That was a 2% drop from 2016. In addition, those having the most children are least able to pay for their upbringing. American women became mothers last year at rates that were inversely proportional to family income. The birth rate was almost 50% higher for those with less than $10,000 in family income than for those with family of incomes of $200,000 or more. The notion that we can simply import foreigners to make up the child-rearing job we've refused to do ourselves completely ignores the cultural, civic, and economic impacts of immigration, as well as the impacts to ourselves when we bring foreign adults as a substitute for raising our own children. Yes, it fundamentally changes our society. We are 45 years away from Statscan saying that 90% of our immigration at the M1 scenario, all of it at the low scenario, all of our growth to the population will come from immigration. That's incredible. I would very much like for our politicians to start solving the problem and maybe start trying to create a baby boom by solving these problems instead of blaming Canadian women for not having babies and saying, well, I guess you're not having babies anymore. I suppose it's time to import your replacements. And this Institute for Canadian Citizenship that Canadian taxpayers pay for has no problem with replacing absolutely every single one of us. So is that the way we want our country to go? Signing the Global Compact on Migration makes this plan much easier. Much easier to bring this level of people into Canada if you can just open the borders and everybody can come. Our old immigration system, the one that we had in place previous, Stephen Harper and previous, takes time. You have to vet all these people. But time, no, we don't have that. We need financial growth, right? We need to maintain that tax base. All those boomers are retiring and passing on. So, we got to replace all those people. That's what's going on. That's what the governments are looking at. They're looking at these reports to inform their process. Is that what we want? Here's the conclusion of the report. Even with major shifts in the components of population growth, such as fertility and immigration, the continuation of population aging and slowing growth will not be reversed. Only the pace will quicken or slow. These results also demonstrate that the growth of the Canadian population will slow over the coming years, largely a result of the increasing numbers of deaths, which will limit the contribution of natural increase to population growth. Lastly, the proportion of the population represented by the working age population, those 15 to 64, will also decrease over the next years as the baby boom cohort gradually moves into the population aged over 65 and over. All in all, the results of this edition of the projections show considerable differences in population growth, both across the regions of Canada and between the different scenarios for a given region. This variation demonstrates without a doubt that the future of Canadian population is far from determined. As a result, projection users should consider several scenarios in combination when using these results. So, again, this isn't written in stone. This is Statscan sharing what their projections show. And my problem is the politicians have no will whatsoever to address the root causes of a low fertility rate. Their solution is to wholesale import a replacement population, and they're acknowledging it in their behavior, in their right out in the open, in their institutes that they fund with taxpayer money. It's incredible. Is this what we want for our country? Why are we silent? Look at what's happening in France and all across Europe. Why is it not informing our politicians? And why are they not using that as a launching point to speak about these things? Look at what's happening in France. Do we want that here? Why isn't Scheer hammering Trudeau on this daily? Thank you very much for watching, everybody. I'll be coming out with the Maxime Bernier video probably later on today. There's big news in Max's camp. I think we've got over 250, 260 EDAs set up in different locations in Canada. So lots of good news to share there. Thanks for watching. Sorry this is a long one. And have a great Monday.